How do you adapt your presentation to different cultures? In a globalized world, a presentation is not merely an act of sharing ideas. It is a process of building bridges between different value systems, beliefs, and modes of receiving information. An effective presentation isn't defined by how well the speaker speaks, but by how deeply the audience feels respected, understood, and engaged. Cultural adaptation in presentation, therefore, is not compromise. It is the art of connection. Understanding culture is not to avoid conflict, but to create meaningful dialogue. A great presenter doesn't change the message to fit the audience, but changes the expression so that every audience receives the message in their cultural language. A cross-cultural presentation does not begin with speech, it begins with quiet observation. Watching eye movement, pace of reactions, degree of silence, and the nuances of nodding are how a speaker listens with their eyes and understands with their intuition. Culture is not found in words, it's in how people respond to them. If you can't feel the atmosphere, you'll never touch the heart. Cultural adaptation doesn't mean changing yourself to be accepted. It means creating space for others to enter your message without losing their own identity. A great intercultural speaker doesn't just make a message understandable, they make it emotionally and culturally approachable. This kind of sensitivity is not a technique, it's an attitude. Not all eloquent speakers are effective communicators. Only those who listen with humility and curiosity can create presentations that transcend borders. Each culture possesses not just its own language, but its own emotional systems, reactions, and logic. The same phrase may be interpreted as humility in Japan, vagueness in the US, and lack of confidence in Germany. Effective presentation, therefore, cannot rely merely on correct vocabulary. It must be rooted in contextual precision. Presenters must ask, how will this message shift when filtered through another cultural lens? Just like light refracting through a prism. Cross-cultural presentation is not simply a translation of language to language, but a transformation from worldview to worldview, from custom to sensibility, from value to verbal expression. A profound presenter doesn't simplify themselves to be understood, they deconstruct their internal frameworks to enable multi-layered dialogue. This is no longer a technique, it is a mode of intercultural thinking, where identity isn't erased but refined, so it may shine in forms others can receive. One of the paradoxes in global communication is that the same presentation structure may be judged too aggressive in one culture and perfectly clear in another. This is not about style, it's about how trust is constructed. In consensus-based cultures, the audience needs to sense your humility and awareness of shared space. In efficiency-based cultures, they want you to be decisive, direct, and outcome-driven. Therefore, in international speaking contexts, presenters must abandon uniform delivery and cultivate persuasive rhythm flexibility. This is a deeply human skill, unsubstitutable by any visual tool. The ability to recalibrate, not for one's personal preference, but for the trust-building pattern of the audience. A cross-cultural talk is not judged by perfection, but by authentic presence. Not whether you speak well, but whether others feel spoken to. Difference doesn't make presenting harder, it makes it richer, more alive. But only if the speaker embraces difference as a creative substance, not a threat. When you enter a room as a foreigner, you don't carry the power of language, you carry the power of building bridges of understanding. These bridges are not built through slides, they're built through cultural curiosity, patient listening, and the willingness to ask before answering. An intercultural speaker doesn't need to know everything about every culture. They need to know how to stay with not knowing without fear. From that space, each response becomes more than information. It becomes a gesture of respect. When the audience feels that you are truly walking with them, they listen not just with intellect, but with heart. In cross-cultural presentations, what matters most may not be what is said, but what is left unsaid. Silence holds different meanings. In Northern Europe, it signals agreement. In Japan, it shows respect. but in some Western contexts, it may suggest dissent or distraction. Therefore, a speaker cannot measure success by laughter or questions alone, but must sense the nonverbal energy in the room. This demands deep emotional intelligence, the ability to read a room's breathing, to detect subtle shifts in atmosphere, and to pace the presentation accordingly. Presenting is not about sound, it is about rhythm, the flow between presence and pause, between information and emotional stillness. It is in those still spaces that trust is built not through intellect, but through shared intuition. In today's global world, one increasingly valuable skill is the ability to make others feel they belong, even when you don't belong to their culture. A good speaker doesn't need to know 10 languages, but they must know one thing: how to make people feel seen, understood, and respected. This doesn't come from flashy titles or strong data, but from pronouncing names correctly, avoiding controversial examples, and using eye contact as a promise. A global talk doesn't succeed because the content shines. It succeeds because it touches something deep in the collective cultural memory of the audience. That touch is not measurable by metrics, but by the still silence that follows a sentence. Great speakers don't persuade, they invite. And in that invitation, the audience listens not with ears, but with history, memory, and trust. In the end, cross-cultural presenting isn't about speaking to avoid mistakes. It's about speaking honestly in a way that's still heard. Great speakers don't erase difference, they allow it to exist without dominance. This requires moral grounding, the courage to say what's right in a way that's fitting, to stand amid difference without erasing oneself, and to keep one's voice while opening to others. A powerful talk is not loud, it's one that can echo inside others in their own voice. Presentation, then, is not just an art of expression, it is the humility of knowledge that makes it travel deeper and further. When you present as a learner, you are listened to as a guide. A cross-cultural presentation doesn't end when you finish speaking. It begins when the audience starts thinking within their own value systems. When you present to diverse cultures, you're not just speaking, you're touching the invisible layers of collective consciousness, history, and shared belief. This cannot be achieved through technique alone. It requires deep presence, showing up not just with words, but with respect, attitude, and listening. And in that presence, your message ceases to be yours. It becomes part of a global conversation, one that others can carry on in their own language, tone, and cultural voice. That is the ultimate aim of presenting, not to impress but to open. If you believe intercultural communication is the core skill of global citizenship, share this message so together we can build a world where speaking is not just transmission, but connection, not just persuasion, but awakening. Subscribe, share, and spread talks that live within people, beyond borders, beyond time.